It was a bitterly cold morning when David, a kind-hearted construction worker, took his usual shortcut through the wooded outskirts of town. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long golden shadows across the frost-covered ground. As he walked, lost in thought, he suddenly heard a faint whimpering. He paused, straining his ears. The sound was weak but desperate, almost drowned out by the wind rustling through the trees. He followed the noise, stepping carefully through the undergrowth until he spotted something that made his heart clench. There, huddled beneath a rotting wooden shed, was a German shepherd. Her ribs protruded through her thin fur, and her eyes, deep pools of exhaustion and fear, locked onto his. But what really caught his attention was what lay beside her. Tiny, fragile bodies curled up against her for warmth. Puppies. David took a cautious step forward, but the mother let out a low, warning growl. She was protecting them, even in her weak state. He raised his hands slowly. "David? Hey, girl, I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to help." The dog didn't move, but she didn't growl again either. Her breathing was ragged, her body trembling from hunger and exhaustion. The puppies, too small to understand danger, let out tiny squeaks as they nuzzled closer to her. David knew he couldn't leave them there. The temperature was dropping, and they wouldn't survive much longer. But there was a problem. David had always wanted a dog, but his tiny apartment barely had space for him, let alone a large German shepherd and her litter. He also barely made enough money to cover his own expenses. Taking them in would be a challenge, a huge one. Yet as he looked at the mother dog, weak but still fiercely protective of her pups, something inside him refused to walk away. "David, VO, okay, you can trust me." Reaching into his lunchbox, he pulled out a half-eaten sandwich and carefully placed it near the mother. She eyed it suspiciously before sniffing at it, then finally, with a deep hunger, began eating. And that was the moment David knew she would let him help. It took nearly an hour to gain her trust enough to move her. Gently, he scooped up each tiny puppy and placed them inside a cardboard box he had found nearby. The mother watched him carefully but didn't object. Finally, with patience and a few more encouraging words, she let him carry her too. By the time he arrived at his apartment, he was already wondering how on earth he was going to make this work. But when he set the box down and watched the mother curl protectively around her puppies, something inside him told him that he had made the right decision. That night, David made a bed for them with old blankets. The mother dog, who he decided to name Luna, watched him with a mixture of suspicion and gratitude. He knew she had been abandoned, perhaps by someone who no longer found her useful, but despite everything, she had never given up on her babies. And now, David wouldn't give up on them either. Over the next few weeks, David devoted every spare moment to caring for Luna and her puppies. He bought dog food instead of his usual instant noodles, waking up early to clean up after them before heading to work. His friends called him crazy. "Friends! VO, you can barely afford your own rent, David. Why are you taking on more responsibility?" But David only smiled. "David, VO, because they needed someone." And soon the change in Luna was undeniable. She gained weight, her coat grew shiny, and her once weary eyes were now filled with trust. She no longer flinched when David reached out to pet her. As for the puppies, they thrived. Tiny, clumsy things that tumbled over one another, yipping playfully. Each one had their own personality. One was bold and adventurous, another quiet and shy. David couldn't keep them all, and he knew it, so he found them loving homes, people who would cherish them the way they deserved. One by one, the puppies left, and each goodbye was harder than the last. Finally, it was just Luna and David. One evening, as David sat on his couch after a long shift, Luna curled up beside him and rested her head on his lap. He ran his fingers through her fur, thinking about how different his life had been just a few weeks ago. He had started with nothing but an empty apartment and a routine existence. Now he had companionship, loyalty, and a bond stronger than words. And as he looked down at Luna, he realized something. She had saved him as much as he had saved her.